and this is going back to my moments that matter and the one-on-ones that you have with your manager and building trust with your employees, is that you're really going to start to learn your employee beyond who they are at work and what is their family structure and who is important to them in their lives, so that when things do happen, you can be there for them.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Erika Sinner. How are you doing, Erika?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's actually sunny in London, so that is a shocker. Erika, has anybody told you something particularly strange when they've been working with you? It's a weird question, isn't it?
When they've been working with me just in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say maybe Erica E is for extra. I have a lot of energy all the time. I'm
Yeah.
highly caffeinated. So that might be a little weird, but it is just who I am.
Cool. And
Yeah,
tell us a little bit more about you.
of course. I am the CEO of a company that helps small to mid-sized pharmaceutical companies bring products to market so that their patients who need them most can get access to them.
Yeah.
And I just purchased a company, Tiny Superheroes, that helps kids with disabilities see their disability as a superpower. And this year, I wrote my book and published it around pets or family, and really hoping to change the conversation and normalize the grief associated with losing our animals.
Wow. That's quite a lot. That is
There's
quite a lot, Erika.
lot going on.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about the art of understanding and catering to diverse grieving experiences amongst employees. So, what do you actually mean about that?
Yeah, I think I would say at least here in the United States, it's we all want to get back to normal. We all want to be okay. We want to go back to being happy. We don't have any, federal laws or anything around bereavement leave in general. And I am not saying that we should, as any country should. I'm hoping our conversation really inspires employers to want to be there for their employees through really hard times, whether it be a human being or an animal, because grief is so difficult and it is so hard. And it's a tough topic to talk about, because I think when you think about losing someone or your animal, you start to think about your own self, right? And your own mortality, and all of the questions come up. And it's also the most natural thing in the world. We all go through, death. And so if we could be there for one another, I think we could make a really big difference in a lot of people's lives.
Hmm. I think that's true. So, how does an organization then foster a culture that has real meaningful connection with others?
I think it's remembering that we are all human beings coming to work. And as a CEO, I understand that it is, we have deliverables, we have numbers we need to meet. But I also recognize, and this is why it's so important for me to talk, to the public and other employers, none of those plans are going to happen if you don't have your employees, and your employees are human beings. And so the culture can't just be happy hours or group outings. It has to be in the every single day. How are you connecting with your team members? How are you building trust? And how are you showing up for them when things that happen outside of work, like grief, happen to them? Because we are not robots. And so, of course, when things happen outside of work, it's going to impact our work productivity.
Makes a
So
lot of sense.
yeah, and I think in terms of like how do you do that, I think it's making it okay to say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. It's helping reprioritize tasks. It's helping connect with your team to ask how are they doing, and really as a manager asking your employees how they're doing, but then actually listening to what they're saying, and develop that relationship, which then develops trust. And when you do that, I think an employee will show up more for their employer when their employer shows that they care about them too. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship to be able to do that for each other, right? Like you will go the extra mile if you feel like your employer really does care about you and they showed up for you when you were going through a really hard time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm just wondering, what kind of actionable strategies an organization could take?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our company, we have a document that's called Moments That Matter, and it is all of our company meetings. So in my mind, it's a reminder just in the title of itself that these meetings that you have with your team truly are moments in the day that really matter because you're taking time to communicate projects, to bring each other up to speed, whatever it might be. And so in this formalized Moments That Matter document, we have here's all the touch points that we have as a team. And one of those is a one-on-one connection with your employee. I always hear, and in my past corporate life, the one-on-ones with your manager are always the first meetings to get canceled, right? You're going to prioritize your clients, you're going to prioritize your bigger team meetings or your all company meetings, but they matter. And so at our company, it's a requirement that you must have a one-on-one with your employee every single week. Any direct report that you have, you must make time for them. And it's not just about the work, but it's also to check in on how they're doing. I think that type of requirement in organizations could be really meaningful. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's just 30 minutes or it's just an hour. I don't really know the difference that's going to make, or you don't understand. There's a lot of things that are going on. But it is that critically important. Those 30 minutes or that 1 hour that you do once a week with your employee allows you to keep a pulse on how they're doing. Are they struggling? You're not letting things fester. You're giving them an opportunity to talk to you. Um, and if you're in an organization where you can't even find 30 minutes, then I think there's even bigger things to really try to solve for. Because it is your team. It's the very people who are going to help you accomplish the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Makes a lot of sense. I think it's quite interesting where a manager might say to somebody like 2 minutes before the meeting, oh, we're not doing this, or I'm sorry, I'm really, really busy. I've only got 10 minutes. And then wanting to like not reschedule it, but get it all done in that 10 minutes.
Yes. Oh my gosh, this is yes. So see you've seen it too. I feel like it is not only the last thing to get canceled or the first thing to get canceled, I should say, but also it does happen that way where even 5 minutes before the meeting, it's like, oh, can we just catch up next week? Can we just do something next week? I'm really busy this week. I think you're signaling to somebody, oh wow, okay, like my work doesn't matter, but also I don't matter, right? You've got more important things than me, and you're my boss. Um, but also, I think if managers who say, well, if you need the time, just put it on my calendar, that also signals too, like the power dynamic between a manager and a direct report. It's more meaningful if the manager is the one seeking out versus the direct report who might see that you're really busy all of the time. I don't know if I should put time on your calendar. It just changes the whole relationship if you just proactively say, I want to know what's going on in your life, or these moments can be so much more than just product updates. You could be asking things like, tell me something you're really proud of that happened last week. And the type of conversation that you'll have, you might find out about projects that you didn't even know were happening. But you also might ask them, tell me something that was really frustrating last week that you thought could have gone easier. There have been one-on-ones where I have found asking that somebody might have said, oh, I was working through this really big budget document and it was hard to zoom in and do all of the things when you're responsible for massive budgets that we do for some of our clients. Um, you find out that, gosh, a second monitor could have changed everything. And now I've changed the entire employee experience by just buying a second monitor. Like that to me is how you impact culture, not just the happy hours or, gifts at holidays. It's
Yeah.
really like the day to day.
Yeah, those things that are transitory, I guess. So
Yeah.
then the other thing is like if we all do grieve in different ways, how do we how do we cater to that? So there are some cultures that will need to spend, I don't know, 10 days away at a funeral.
Hmm.
There's HR policies that say, you can get time off if a close family member dies, but sometimes it's the grandmother, but it's the grandmother that raised the person, for example. So they're like a mother,
Hmm.
but they might be excluded from the generic policy. How do we make sure that we somehow respectfully cater for what people need when they're grieving, whilst retaining some sort of consistency across the organization? Or is
Yeah.
that not possible? Maybe it's not possible.
No, I think, every organization has to figure out what is possible for them. So, I've talked to CEOs who have said to me, well, do you give the same amount of days as you would for a child or as you would for a spouse? Or like how are you thinking about bereavement for animals? And in my mind, animals are a very important part of your life. You see them more than you see most of your family members. They are consistently there when you get home, when you wake up, especially since COVID. A lot of us have been working from home. They're with you all of the time. So when you lose one, it is a major loss that is happening. A study have shown it is equal and sometimes more painful to lose an animal than a human being that you know. You've never had a bad memory. It's unconditional love. You are responsible for their well-being. And so my response to any CEO or employer, if you have a bereavement policy for humans, it should just be expanded to include animals. And then you would plan for it in the same way that you would when a human being passes. At the same time, I understand there's also companies where they're like, hey, I work in retail. I can't just be giving time off. I don't know how I would do this. And my response to them is just, can you put a compassionate hat on? And, if you're a smoker, you get 15-minute breaks every hour. I think people allow for that to happen. Maybe every hour the manager goes to your cashier and says, do you need to take a walk? Do you need to go outside and take some fresh air? It's can you show up for your employee in a way that is possible for your own organization that acknowledges you have had a major loss. We are here for you. It is okay for you to be hurting. And you can adapt it to your own organization's way of working, but it's this acknowledgement in my mind that is really important. I also would say to all employers, when you lose an animal, at least for myself, like if I wasn't the CEO, if I didn't own my own company, if I was your employee, might just take a sick day anyway. Like, so at least this way you have a way that you could have shown up for them in a way that was meaningful versus they might just be taking the time off anyway, or they might just quit on their own. And studies also show backfilling a position can cost 3 to 4 times the salary position that you're looking for. So, there's an emotional benefit, I think, that you can have by being there in a moment that really matters. But there's also the economic benefit that can really benefit the employer. And so whichever reason of why you would be inspired to do it, can you just take a look at your policies? Are they compassionate? Do they include animals? And then how do you adjust them to whatever your specific field is within your organization?
Okay. So I've got a couple of things going on in my head now. So
Yes.
one of them is, how do you know a pet's died? In the sense that for some employees, they may have multiple pets that have died that may or may not have existed in the first place.
Yeah.
For others, what class is a pet? Goldfish, stick insect, dog? What type? This is my HR brain thinking like,
Yeah.
how do I define pet? Right. So,
Yeah.
it's very fraught. And then the other thing I was also thinking was, and this is where I'm more aligned to what you're saying, I guess, is we give, we in the UK, I should say, maybe different elsewhere, you would get some sort of compassionate leave if you gave birth to a stillborn child. But if you miscarried, you'd get nothing.
Mhm.
And there's still pain and real grief, aligned with a miscarriage. But it becomes something that for a lot of women, they can't mention it because they see it as a something that they've done, or it's shameful for them, or whatever. And other people around them are like, don't worry about it, you can have another one. Like, that life that you was carrying doesn't matter. So, so I think in some of it, so in my experience from a HR perspective, I think a lot more damage is caused over things like a miscarriage compared to pets. Because I've literally been in organisations where people have been genuinely concerned for someone who's had a dog that died and have given them a lot of compassion. And then in the same department, some woman has maybe lost a baby at 20 weeks or something. And it's like, oh, well, at least, at least you try again. And it's like, it feels like that not cause more of a long-term issue for not showing up for the individual because you legally don't have to, if you sort of mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and it's definitely something we all have to think about. And I wrote about this in my book, where my book is really about, for me, it's pets and it's animals, and I don't have children, human kids. My husband and I chose not to, so I can't put myself in the position of someone, who has lost a baby at 20 weeks. But the point of my book too is, can we open our minds and hearts to understand somebody else's grief and say,
Exactly.
I believe you. I believe that this is that painful, even if you haven't been through it yourself. One company I spoke to here in the States, what they have is a compassionate leave policy. And so it was to your earlier example of what happens if somebody's grandmother passes away, but that was really like their mom. Like, it wasn't really their grandma. It was like that was their mom, and they were there for them. And so it covers all types of what it does is it's funeral leave, but for all types of relationships. And it's up to the employee to be able to voice them to their manager, and for the manager to say, yes, I hear you. Here, you can take advantage of our policy. Here are how many
Yeah,
days you
that
get
makes
based
sense.
on the policy. Um, and I would say the way that you would know that it's real or that it really happened, I think, some companies, if hourly employees, sometimes they ask, can you give a obituary, or can you tell us that this has actually happened? And for animals, I would say maybe it's a note from your vet. For a miscarriage, maybe it's a note from your doctor that comes through. But then other companies, it's really the word of the employee with their manager. And this is going back to my moments that matter and the one-on-ones that you have with your manager and building trust with your employees, is that you're really going to start to learn your employee beyond who they are at work, and what is their family structure, and who is important to them in their lives, so that when things do happen, you can be there for them in the right way, right? So I would say a policy could be a just compassionate leave policy, whatever the right amount of days is for your own organization, to say, this is what we're honoring in this year, or that will make sense for your business. And then it's really up to the manager to make sure that it's not being abused. Because I have received that question too, where they're like, well, what if somebody has, 7 dogs and they all pass away in the same year? Am I supposed to give all 7 times? And I asked, well, what would you do if they had 7 human kids and all 7 passed at different times throughout the year, right? Like, we don't, it's case by case. And you also shouldn't. And then they asked too, well, what happens if an employee abuses this and they start saying it's for my this and it's for that, and now I need this, and whatever it might be? You also, from an HR perspective, in my view, shouldn't create policies, or shouldn't not create policies for the lowest common denominator. You should create policies for the culture that you want to build within your organization. And then your managers are responsible for making sure that they're not being abused. And if you do have an employee who is abusing a policy, they're likely not meeting expectations, or they might be abusing other policies. So they should be managed out anyway from a performance perspective. But don't punish the rest of your team that is doing a really great job and they're not taking advantage of the policies, where you could really be showing up for them, or all of the things that you just mentioned. I can imagine that would be really hard for somebody who lost their baby at 20 weeks. And that is real grief. That's real loss.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I suppose in the UK, compassionate policy, compassionate leave is commonplace. So in the UK that wouldn't be unusual. And I
Oh,
think you're
good.
right. Yeah, and I think you're right that policy should, the way I've written them in the past and seen them, is that you have a policy and variants come to the HR department, and then you're more likely to get an objective view. So I mean, there's been
Yes.
times where I've said to the managers, "Oh yeah, I've authorized time off for this," and they've like, "I don't want you to." It's like, but because that you've had the confidential conversation that they've not had, and you've said, you need to trust me. This is a good reason why that person won't be in. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you're going to have to trust me that it's okay. And then
Yes.
that comes down to the relationship that you have with those managers.
That's
Um, and I suppose it comes down to the level of ability, managerial ability within the organization. And I suppose, to come back down to it, is about compassion, um, and what's right. And I think it would be wrong to not consider how policies could be abused, but it's also not to lose the goodness or something because it could be abused. It's like and I think, sizes of organizations make a huge difference, whether it's a small organization or a large organization. And I just think this is like my legal head thinking. It's just like, as soon as you have a policy about defined policy about pets, then you have to start defining what a pet is. And then that is going to cause a lot of problems. But yeah, I think a common sense approach can make a huge amount of difference.
Huge difference. And also proper managerial training and support. I think, to your point around, like, I think managers today, sometimes you're promoted before you've even received proper training around how to have difficult conversations, how to get feedback, how to performance manage, how to do all of the things. But always being able to go back to, at least you have human resources. You have someone who they can speak to, even if if you have not built that trust yet with the employee, do you have an HR partner who can help you have that confidential conversation? And then you have like you said, the objective third party that can say, no, really, that this is needed. And you just have to trust me on this one. And for really small organizations, I think, to me, going back to the one-on-one conversation and to really care about your employee as a human being, not as just an employee. And listen, I'm not saying we all are a family at work. I talk about that a lot at our team too, where I'm like, we're not a family. Like we are a community who are all working towards the same goal.
You can't sack your family, right? So you're definitely not family.
True. But also, families can also, cross boundaries and do all sorts of things. So I always just say we're all a community. We are all contributing to the same common goal. We all have a job to do, and we're all here to show up for each other in the ways that we have agreed to when we joined the community. And so I think that's just a very different relationship that you have, but also, can you be there for each other and figure things out along the way when things come up, because they're going to come up because we are human beings. And so when there is leave, if you have a culture where everyone understands, hey, I have a contribution to make because I have signed up to be a part of this community and my team is leaning on me or they depend on me, then when something does happen, like you have a loss in your family, then your team wants to show up for you too. And you figure out, how do you reprioritize tasks? How do we ease you back in? How do we cover for you? I think that also strengthens the bond within the team, so that when it inevitably happens to someone else on the team, then you want to show up for them too whenever they're having their hard time. That's also going back to like the culture and how does the manager structure the team and how does the team feel about being on the team they're on?
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. I think this has been a fantastic conversation, Erika.
Oh, I'm so glad. It's such important topics. I mean, we spend so much time at work that, it really matters. And when things happen outside of work, it of course will impact us at work. So thank you for having me on and having this discussion. It's a hard one to have. And I'm just glad we can't normalize something if we don't talk about it. So here we are.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you out there for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.